Welcome to Aurora Connects, Season 2. This is episode 10 for Friday, October 16th, 2020, The Hurwitts. In honor of our guest today, I'm going to share a quote from another critic friend of ours that's been on the show, Lily Janiak. A critic doesn't spit out opinions like widgets on a conveyor belt. A critic is no static robot, but a flawed human, hopefully a growing, evolving one. And if you think I've made a wrong turn on mine, I trust you'll let me know. That was in a little sidebar she published back in September, about a month ago. Hey, Josh, how are you?
Hey, Dawn, I'm good. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm glad to be here on another Friday. We're inching closer and closer to our opening of the flats. So despite my despite my aesthetic displeasure with virtual backgrounds, I'm going with the not so subtle advertisement. Friends, as we talk to Robert and Sam today, you can chat us on Facebook and YouTube. We love to get your comments and questions. Also, if other things come up for you and you want to reach out about the show, drop us an email at connects@auroratheater.org. connects@auroratheater.org. Josh is going to tell you a little bit more about how you too can listen to episode 1 of The Flats next Friday.
Yeah, so The Flats is Aurora's first audio drama. It's a world premiere. It's a full-length story. It's written by 3 local playwrights that we commissioned to write this play. It's called The Flats. It's set in Berkeley. The playwrights are Cleavon Smith, Jonathan Spector, and Lauren Gunderson. And it is acted by Lauren English, Anthony Fusco, and Kari L. Moy, as well as Rebecca Schweitzer. It's a fantastic story. It's about 3 residents of a triplex in Berkeley during a shelter-in-place that is not our current shelter-in-place, but something else. And it speaks so powerfully to what we're going through right now, and is a very funny, very, I think, profound story. So I hope that you'll listen to The Flats. Elton Bradman did our music and sound design. We're in post-production getting it all ready, and it sounds so good. It's a great story. It's dropping on Friday. Episode 1 is dropping on Friday. There's going to be 3 episodes, 3 acts. You can buy single tickets. They're on sale now for $20 at auroratheater.org. Or if you have an Aurora Theater Company membership, your ticket to The Flats is included with that membership. And you can get a membership at auroratheater.org, or you can skip straight to members.auroratheater.org if you want to do that. The membership also gets you, in addition to The Flats, it gets you another audio drama we'll be doing in the spring, all kinds of other programming. Dawn's A Year with August Wilson reading group, center stage salons with artists in the Bay Area, all kinds of great stuff at auroratheater.org with our membership program. And while you're at auroratheater.org, you can make a donation to help us get through this very difficult time by clicking the donate button at the top right. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, like I said, today we are joined by Bay Area theater critics Robert Hurwitt and his son, Sam Hurwitt. Welcome to the show, friends. How are you both doing today?
All right. Very well, thank you.
Well, it's an honor to have you both on the show. We had Lily on some time ago. She spoke very highly of you, Robert, as a mentor. And you were the longtime critic at the San Francisco Chronicle. And Sam, you've been all over the place. East Bay Express. I still want to call it Call Board, even though we just had Brad on recently. Theater Bay Area. You maintain your own independent blog. Josh, you have such a long history with these gentlemen. We were just reflecting on shows that they'd seen of yours 20 some odd years ago. Why don't you give us some of that juice from their bios?
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah. So Rob Hurwitt was the critic for the Chronicle from 2000 to 2016. I believe, Rob, I was looking you up, and it sounds like you grew up in New York and then moved to Berkeley in the 60s to study English at Cal. Is that right?
That's right. Yep.
And you started writing for the Berkeley Barb?
Yes, that was after the free speech movement, after graduating from the free speech movement, and then the Vietnam Day Committee. And having finally decided to get back into theater and on stage, and I'd gone and joined the mime troupe, And a friend of mine started what was then called the underground newspapers, were a big deal around the country. And he started an underground newspaper in his hometown in DC and asked me to be his West Coast correspondent. So I wrote a couple pieces for him, and Max Shear, who was running the Barb, called me up and said, "Hey, why don't you write for me?" So I started writing for him, and that's basically how I started. I left the mime troupe and started being a journalist because I figured, hey, you can always make a living as a journalist. Now it's probably safer to try to make a living as an actor.
Oh, that's a scary thought.
Yes, isn't it?
And so you already had a passion for theater, would you say, before that? Like, how did you come to love theater and love writing about theater?
I would say there were two seminal theater productions in my growing up that probably shaped my whole approach to the theater. And one was when I guess it was the very early 50s, when my parents dragged me to see Peter Pan with Mary Martin playing Peter Pan. And I was dragged to it because I was a huge Disney fan as growing up and as a budding cartoonist. And I thought, there's no way you can do Peter Pan, with live people on stage. And that show, corny as it is to this day, Cyril Richard as Captain Hook, I came out of it thinking, there's no way you can do animation or film that would capture the experience of seeing this guy dance the tarantella. So I began going to as much theater as I could. Up through high school, was seeing a lot of Broadway musicals and Broadway plays. And then I saw Threepenny Opera in the Theatre de Lys, the Mark Blitzstein production with Lotte Lenya. And that it felt like the scales had fallen from my eyes. I had thought theater was wonderful and magic, but I was sitting there in the theater thinking, I didn't know you could say that on stage. I didn't know you could think that. I mean, we're coming out of the McCarthy era, and here's, Bertolt Brecht and Kurt Weill. So that probably changed my whole opinion from there on of what theater could be. And
that's great. And so there you are in the 70s, and you have little baby Sam, who's now all grown up. And Sam, you follow. I mean, I knew you when we were teenagers, and you ended up following in your father's footsteps. And you have written reviews for, as Dawn said, lots of different papers: Marin Independent Journal, the East Bay Express, the Area News Group, as well as being the editor of Theater Bay Area Magazine. What's going on here? Is it genetic? Is your son Sam going to be a theater critic as well? Like, what's happening?
Well, I mean, it's not genetic, and it wasn't intentional. I
failed.
Yeah, I hadn't originally intended to go into journalism at all. When I got out of college, I went traveling around, backpacking around Europe, decided to stay in Budapest for a matter of months and needed to get a job. And so my only skills were really writing. And so I walked into one of the English language newspapers in Budapest and said that they should let me write movie reviews for them, because there were a number of English language movies playing in Budapest. And they were picking up these terrible syndicated reviews from the Hollywood Reporter. They were just not good reviews for one. So I just walked into the office and said, you can do better than this. Email wasn't really a thing so much at the time. So and they, tried me out. And so I started writing initially movie reviews in Hungary. And then I came back, started proofreading for the Express, for the East Bay Express, and then started doing rock concert review. Well, first book reviews and then rock concert reviews for the East Bay Express. And I was doing that for a good, I'd been a journalist for a good 10 years, just, by one thing leading to another, before I ever wrote a theater review. And I'd, in fact, kind of avoided theater because, that was my father's thing, and I didn't want to invite comparisons. By that point, I had been the arts editor for the East Bay Express for a number of years before they were bought by a national chain, and I wound up moving back to Hungary for a while. That's a long story. But anyway, by the time I started writing about theater, I'd done this for a long time, and I figured, well, I don't really have an excuse because I grew up I don't have an excuse not to, because I grew up going to theater, and particularly theater in the Bay Area. I know it very well, and by that point, I had kind of found my voice as a writer, which was not very much like my father's voice at all. And so I figured, fine, I originally started filling in for Lisa Drostova when she was on vacation, writing freelance theater reviews for the East Bay Express, and then just kept doing it. Other publications asked me to write about theater for them because they'd seen that I was writing about theater, and it wound up being weirdly in demand. So I just kind of kept doing it until it became a passion, and have been doing it ever since. Well, almost ever since, not for the last 6 months, obviously.
Yeah, we'll get to that. And so did you, Rob, did you bring Sam with you when he was growing up to see these plays that you were reviewing? Like, was that a big part of the family?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, after the 70s, and after the taking off most of the first part of that decade, because I had 2 little kids and not seeing any theater except interestingly for an Ubu, a cowboy version of Ubu that John Lyon created at the Magic Theater when it was still at the Steppenwolf on San Pablo in Berkeley. So the early days, and I went to it with Ronnie Davis, the founder of the Mime Troupe, and we co-wrote a review of John Lyon's terrible version of Ubu. Nothing to compare with your awfully prescient adaptation of Ubu that you did for what, Shotgun? Ubu
Shotgun Players, yeah, Ubu for President. Yes, that play it's been surpassed by reality in a bizarre.
It has. But whenever people want to compare Trump to, what Shakespeare comedy or whatnot, I say, no, it's Ubu.
Period. Yeah.
Period. That's it. It's not even, it'll never happen here, as prescient as Taccone was, the 2 of you. But yes, when I started writing, I began taking the kids to anything I thought that they might like, including a couple of shows that we walked out of at Family Classic Theater in Berkeley. And I loved taking them particularly to Lamplighters, the Gilbert and Sullivan, because they both loved Gilbert and Sullivan. They loved the complexity of the plots. And I remember, one of the first ones was like Pirates of Penzance, right? Of course, because they're always doing pirates. And at the intermission, I'm saying, okay, now do you understand that he's born in a leap year? Of course, he's not, they knew exactly what was going on. It was like I was prepared to explain all the complexities. And I thought, okay, Gilbert and Sullivan, perfect for, 4-year-olds and 6-year-olds. And they loved Gilbert and Sullivan. I took them to a lot of theater. Before I became a critic again, I did some acting because I was managing a theater called Epic West, which is now the Julia Morgan Center for the Arts. And they desperately needed a replacement at the last minute. And Ronnie Davis was directing the show, and he walked into my office and he said, "You used to be a quick study." And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Oh, wait a minute." And I went on in the lead with 2 days of rehearsal. which was a nightmare. And I got a rave review from Bernie Weiner in the Chronicle saying you can see his thought process. You can see him thinking. And I said, of course you can see me thinking. I'm trying to remember what my next line is, desperately. And I did one last show there, which was a Moliere. And I brought Sam to see it. And it was The Imaginary Invalid. And I was the doctor who comes on at the end with the big bombastic doctor who delivers the Moliere's huge satire on the hypocrisy of, and he fell asleep before I came on.
Oh,
I
never forgave him.
I really remember a lot of the shows that we saw when I was a kid. I mean, obviously things like Pickle Family Circus and a lot of Mime Troupe. I really fondly remember, in particular, the Fact Wino trilogy, and we went to those regularly. A lot of Shakespeare. Went to what was then the Berkeley Shakespeare Festival, now Cal Shakes. I remember the first
I took you to
time,
a couple of others Shakespeare's in other parts of the Bay Area.
Oh, for sure. I remember the first time we went to see Romeo and Juliet, in which Annette Bening was Juliet. I was very excited to see Romeo and Juliet, and I created a little banner, like one of those rectangular sports banners that said "Go Montagues," that I would show in the audience,
which I had to confiscate on the way into the theater. But I remember taking him to a show at ACT. Oh God, was it? Was it McNally? There was a show that was set in it was one of those shows where they have a group of people who are stranded all together in the same place, and they're all very different characters and whatnot, And in this case, they're stranded together because of a potential nuclear accident at a nuclear plant in the area. And we came out of it, and Sam said, I asked him how he liked it. He said he thought he felt kind of cheated. He said it wasn't really a play about the nuclear accident. That was just an excuse to get all these people in the room. And I thought, this kid. So when he became a critic, I wasn't at all surprised.
Now, Sam, you spent some time as an actor as well, didn't you?
Yes, but only up until my teens, only up through high school, and never actually in high school. It was always through workshops and summer like I did the Berkeley Shakespeare Festival summer program a couple of years running, which is actually in a roundabout way how I know Josh, because he went to school with a good friend of mine who I met initially by being in Merry Wives of Windsor together. Yeah.
Is that you in a show?
That's me in a show.
In a real show.
And actually my only quote unquote professional show. Well, I mean, it wasn't a professional show. But I was like 12. Ellen Sebastian Chang directed it, and wrote it and directed it. It was called Choice at Intersection for the Arts. But yeah, I did Mime Troupe workshop, a workshop with George Coates, a lot of theater, and then in college I just had to stop because I had to make a choice in terms of my extracurricular activities, and I could either continue writing or I could continue acting, and I was better at writing than I was at acting, so that was the end of that.
Let me ask you guys a question, and I want to see if I can ask a question that'll get you arguing with each other. What is a critic's role in the community? What do you see as being the purpose of theater criticism? Who is it for, and what is its goal?
I think it depends on who's asking and what venue you're talking about. Because if you are a magazine critic, If you're writing for a monthly or you're writing for a periodical, it's a whole different ballgame. There you are a critic in the classic sense of, you know, the intellectual engagement with the art form. If you're writing for a daily, which is how we think of most theater critics, whoop, sorry, if you're writing for a daily, you don't have that kind of luxury. You're, excuse me, you are essentially, you're writing your daily criticism is a combination of theater criticism and consumer reports. And for a lot of your readers, what they're looking for is this worth spending my time on, or is this worth spending my money on? And that they may be taking your opinion seriously in one of two ways. They may be taking your opinion seriously, you know, that they will follow your recommendations, and they may be taking your opinion seriously in terms of, hey, you know, he hated it, let's go. And I think on the one hand, we all like to think that we are in conversation with the art form, participating in a conversation, not just with the artist, but with the art form itself, and that we are there. Certainly our primary audience is the readers of the paper, not the theater artists, but we are also trying to talk to the theater artists because we're trying to support the art form in a variety of ways. And one of those is just simply the job of telling people what's happening and where it is, and just trying to describe it well enough. If we're granted the room, in the space, to describe it well enough that people can make up they can get what our opinion is, but they can also make up their own minds whether this might be a thing that appeals to them more than it appealed to me, or less.
Yeah, I think that's important. I see the role as not primarily evaluative in the sense of like thumbs up or thumbs down. I recognize that is a useful thing for people, but I've often gotten the feedback that like it's very hard to get to distill a pull quote from you because you're not giving sort of pithy easily encapsulated opinions about things. And the writers that one thing I've always appreciated about writers that I follow is being able to get a good sense of, yes, does this look like something I would like to see, but also just what the experience of it is. And I do think it's a mark of a good writer to, when I can like see something that they wrote about that they hated, but think like, oh, that is something that sounds like something I would be into. But I see my role very much as trying to relate the experience of being at this show from my, from my perspective, because it's always going to be from my perspective because I'm the one writing it. I hate to think of it as like rendering down judgment from on high, because it's an inherently subjective form that we're doing.
And you always have to be conscious of that.
Yeah.
You're always tempted to write, in my opinion, and your editors will strike it because of course it's in your opinion, but that's right. How you're always approaching it.
And by the same token, I think it's a terrible mistake. People will say, well, how can you say that wasn't, you could hear other people were laughing at it. How can you not take that into account? It's like, well, you can't second guess how something is landing for somebody else. That you can't second guess what the artist's intent is. You can't second guess, if I went into this, with some completely different experience, how could I have experienced this show? I think that that's a terrible mistake. So, yeah, and I also think, you know, when I talk about conveying the experience of seeing a show, you know, you also want to be where, you know, you don't want to like relate like, here's everything that happened in the show. I mean, that's also not a service to anyone, but just sort of give a good sense of like, okay, this is what it's like to see the show, you know, from, in my opinion.
So yeah, so it sounds like there's sort of a tension. On the one hand, there's the need to inform the public about the show so that they can make a decision about whether they want to go and see it. But then I want to hear more about this other side of it too, the role of the critic in engaging in the conversation around the work itself, and what that is, and the degree to which that may be in conflict with the other purpose, right? Are those two things working against each other sometimes, or are they can they be seen to support each other?
Hopefully you can make them support each other, because I think the role I think the joy of being a theater critic is that you are a perpetual student. You are always learning.
People at home can't hear me now, but if you can, just know that we are trying to get this. Okay. All right.
I can hear you.
Okay.
I don't know whether that helps.
All right. Well, you were sorry about that, Rob, but you were in the middle of a great answer about the conversation that between critics and the work.
Yeah, I think because it's a three-way conversation, it's between the critics, the work, and the readership. And partly you as the critic, part of your job in being supportive of the art form is educational. Educational not only in letting people know what's happening, but when you feel that this is what you really want to talk about, giving them the tools or the information, giving your readers the information that they may need in order to appreciate it more fully than they might just going to it cold. I remember way back when I first started, Oakland Ensemble Theater did a play about John Brown, the abolitionist, and the night before Harper's Ferry. And the premise of this play was the night before he went to Harper's Ferry, he visited Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass tried to talk him out of, and that's what this play is. It's a conversation between, and I, you know, went to prepare for this show. I didn't want to read the play, but I did want to know how much history we're talking about here. And I happened upon a copy of the autobiography of Frederick Douglass, which, if you haven't read it, is one of the great American autobiographies. And in it, Frederick Douglass describes the night before Harper's Ferry when John Brown came to visit him at his home, and he tried to talk John Brown out of the raid on Harper's Ferry and the reasons why. And the play was very faithful to this. I felt that for the potential audience to know that this was a real matter of history, and in my mind, a very significant matter of American history. So it was great to me that, you know, to be able to write about that. And when that review appeared in the Berkeley Barb, and they had cut out most of what I'd written about the actual history, I stopped writing for the Barb and went over and started writing for the Express. That was kind of it. The Express had been asking me to come over there, and the Express had just started. And so that, I think that's part of it. I think that tension. I think in any good writing, just as, and a critic is mainly a writer, and you're aspiring to write as well as you can about each piece. And I think in any good piece of writing, as in any good piece of theater, there has to be attention. If there's no tension, attention won't be paid. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, you know, we're not writing notes to the artist when we write reviews. You know, we're not, you know, I may have very strong opinions about a play and how I feel like it lands, but you know, I'm not the dramaturg. I don't see myself in that role at all. But you know, at the same time, we do understand that we're all in the community, and there is that, and part of a conversation, and there is that back and forth, and you know, certainly sometimes that conversation informs what people do, and I really relish doing this for so long in one community, and being a theater goer in that community even longer, and seeing the arc of various artists' careers, and seeing seeing how they grow, how they change, how they sometimes you'll see like a great leap in somebody's in a performer's I don't want to say bag of tricks, but you know, in like this, they're really taking their craft to another level in this particular show, and yeah, I think that's one of the great joys of doing this is I think even just as a theater goer is witnessing this larger arc of Bay Area theater, and also that has its drawbacks. Like if I'm writing about a play that I've seen many other productions of, you know, that's useful to a degree as long as you're not constantly comparing it to this production or that production, because that doesn't serve anyone, least of all the reader of the review of this particular production, because you know they it's not very useful for them to think like, oh well, you know, this company may have done it a little better. You know, it's like, oh, okay, but what are you seeing right now, and what's working and what's not working?
Do you always write with the theater goer in mind, or are you ever considering the theater, their marketing, knowing that they're looking for pull quotes, or that a quote from you might be used to market or sell the show?
I mean, I'm aware that happens, but I do not. I would say that I never write for that, and I never write particularly with that in mind. I mean, certainly particularly if something is, particularly if I really, really didn't like something, you know, I am aware that that there are you might want to be diplomatic about this because the people involved are gonna be reading this. But no, I certainly, perhaps to some marketers' frustration, don't particularly write with pull quotes in mind.
My predecessor at the Examiner, Scott Rosenberg, excuse me, who I thought was a terrific critic. One of his quirks was that he purposefully, after he finished each review, he would go over it to make sure there were no potential pull quotes.
See, I've long been convinced that you guys like are very purposeful about giving pull quotes or not. And like, you'll sometimes give a good review, but make sure there's no good pull quote in there. Or sometimes you'll make sure there is a good pull quote in there because you really like it, you know, or something like that. We do a lot of tea leaf reading with the reviews.
I am a great admirer of the art of marketing these things. And sometimes just in the sheer chutzpah. Like I remember particularly a show, I mean, it's hard for me to talk about this without naming the show, but so I'm just going to do it. But I remember a review that my father here wrote for A Christmas Carol at ACT, the new, I mean, it's not new anymore, but the new version of A Christmas Carol that they're still doing, and he did not like it very much. and they used as a pull quote, "It's glorious Christmas," like look out, it's glorious Christmas, Robert Hurwitts, San Francisco Chronicle, which was a quote of a lyric from the actual show that he had quoted in the course of his review.
To
and
show
I,
how
and I think
banal
as
it
an
was.
example of you know of how the lyrics were not particularly good, and they
said glorious.
Yeah, look out, it's glorious Christmas. And I was like, I had to admire the sheer chutzpah of that.
I really liked also one time when I forget now which producer it was, took one of my very negative reviews and cut and pasted words out of it and sent it to me as this absolute rave message that he could reconstruct from which I took as a warning. But one time, what my favorite actually of this kind of thing was when an early play of Shotguns, I believe it was, that they took my review, which was a negative review, and one of the more negative reviews of a Shotgun play that I think I'd ever written. And they printed it up as a flyer and then under it they had the, are you going to take this man's word for it, or are you going to make up your own mind? And they plastered this all over North Side and Telegraph Avenue. Mm-hmm. And I thought, good for you.
There was a similar one that we went to together, again, when I was like, in a preteen. Terrible show. And I remember that you reviewed it and you had called it pretty much a total loss. And what they did, they did an ad that quoted some other review that quite liked it. And then they said, thrilling joyride or total loss. You decide.
Yes. Yeah. But I think the Shotgun did it first.
So when you sit down to watch a play, what are you looking for? What's something when you see it happen on stage, you're like, oh, this is what I'm here for. This is what gets me. Or conversely, what are your pet peeves? What gets you excited about seeing a play?
Well, for me, that varies so much. I mean, it can be, it really is about, just when something really hits a chord. What's really thrilling is when it hits a chord very personally. Like, I'll see a new musical and I'll just get chills from how, exciting a song is to me. Or I remember seeing a production of, Death of a Salesman a couple of years ago. It was a Ubuntu theater project, and it was I'd seen that play a number of times before, and something that hadn't really, an aspect of it that hadn't really connected with me before in other productions that I'd seen, just had me absolutely weeping when I was watching it. And so, that's the best thing, is when something just really blows you away on a personal, emotional level. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think all I can do is agree entirely with Sam. It's not that you go to the theater to a show looking for something. It's not like, I'm sure there are critics who are going to a show looking for what their lead is going to be. What in this production, the main thing that I'm looking for while I'm watching this is how I'm going to frame my review of it. And I think for people like Sam and me, it's more a question of, you sit there and all of a sudden something jumps out at you, and there may be something else that jumps. And if it's something that you're expecting, it's probably not going to make as much of an impact. There are the plays that you see over and over and over and over again. It doesn't matter how many Hamlets you see. You could see Hamlet every night for a week, different Hamlets, and every show would be completely different. And then you have the ones like, I thought Glass Menagerie I knew so well, no one could surprise me with it. Comedy of Errors. I thought, I know Comedy of Errors, and then I saw it presented as a serious, heartrending story of twins who've been separated by this British director, and I was just, And the same guy came back many years later with that huge all India production of Midsummer Night's Dream. That was all the actors, he'd cast actors from all around India, from all the different ethnicities, and they all spoke their lines in their own languages, except for Oberon, who was speaking, as Sundri, Sam's wife, pointed out to me, Sanskrit.
Wow.
Because of course, Oberon, what's he going to speak? He's going to speak Sanskrit. Pet peeves are something else again. And you get many of them over the course of your career. And some of them, fortunately, go away. You will go through, for me, it was going through that period where, oh my God, another Andrew Lloyd Webber. I don't know how long I can stand this. There was, oh my God, another solo play about a famous author or notable person. And the first part of it is going to be establishing some absolutely ridiculous excuse for why this person is standing there telling us in the audience his or her story. And, please, can we? But there are the longer running ones. And you write about those from time to time. And some of them some of them would have to do with the role of women in the theater, the role of different ethnicities in the theater, and how well represented they are, how little represented they are. Others would, for me, one of my longest standing complaints was how little of Carol Churchill's work we see. Mm-hmm. I think Carol Churchill is a writer of such incredible significance that we should be seeing everything that woman writes. And we don't. How little of Garcia Lorca has been presented over the years that I've been a critic. At one point, I wrote a piece saying, there's a whole, this was, I think, in the early 80s, there is a whole theatrical culture in Africa. Fugard, as wonderful as so much of his work is, and some of the other work, I think it was when we began getting the other plays coming out of Johannesburg, but we never ever would see Wole Soyinka or any of the other Nigerian playwrights or all the other. There are all of these, this whole theatrical culture that we got very, very little of. And the same is true for, a whole lot. And I campaigned for, and, we periodically would get little glimmers of it. But I think what the Bay Area needs is much more cross, and has always needed, is more cross-pollination with theater companies from different parts of the world, theater companies from different parts of the country, companies that are doing shows in different ways. And when we began getting the rise of the co-productions, with a company here in the Bay Area doing a co-production with a company in Madison or Atlanta or whatever, yeah, that's a start. But there's so much more we can learn as artists and as theater goers by seeing what's happening everywhere else.
Robert, I just want to bridge a little couple of concepts that you've introduced here. Right now, the We See You White American document is very much out in the ether. We have our own living document here in the Bay Area. Other regions have been really wrestling with the role of the critic for even many years before that. I know Chicago in particular. Brantley has just left the New York Times. So when we talk about, the role or the responsibility of the critic to the community, and then I love to hear you say about cross-pollination, and there are whole theatrical cultures that we haven't been exposed to. I just wonder how you think the critic, if they are outside of a cultural tradition or experience, how they can be responsible and responsive to like writing about that work, or should they not write about that work? And Robert, Sam, also just really interested, what's happening for you as critics, as white male critics right now in this moment.
Well, I'm not, because I'm retired. But I look at it, and I should add to what I said before. We're very lucky in the Bay Area to have had as much as we have had, of like Eureka Doi starting, the theater of Yugen and bringing so much of the Asian tradition, which was a huge education for me. Just as when I first started as a critic, Nora Vaughn, running Black Repertory Theater, was presenting the African-American theatrical literature heritage from the 40s and 50s and 60s that nobody else was going to be doing, because the main stage theaters didn't have the repertory, the actors to do it, and the new Black theaters coming up, like SEW, which became Lorraine Hansberry, they were mostly dedicated to doing new work. So and of course all the teatros, Luis, and then all the teatros. So we do have that heritage. In terms of the critic, I think I think on the one hand, it's no different from the critic's job going into any show, because every show that you go to, it's a learning experience, and you're trying to be as open as you possibly can be to the culture or the religion or the whatnot that's on stage before you. You are never going to have a single critic, obviously, who has training or knowledge in every ethnicity, every gender, or even every aesthetic, the different aesthetics that can make up. I don't think you need that. I think what you need is as much diversity of voices as possible, ethnicity and gender, and from every different vantage point. But you can't expect any one paper to have more than one theater critic. It's just not going to happen. Well, you're lucky if they have one.
Well, and if I may, I think that there are a couple of different, very interconnected factors here. One is that theater criticism in general is overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male, and that is legitimately a problem, and that is and that is something that it's inexcusable that it's as much of a problem now as it was, in the 1970s. I think it's shameful that hasn't gotten better. At the same time, the question of should we even be, should we even be reviewing shows by, different ethnicities, different culture? Oh my God, yes, everybody should. And in fact, as much as possible, more than we do, because we can't get to every show, and it should absolutely be a priority to lift up these voices, whoever you You know, whether you're a white male, whether you're a critic of color, whether you're a woman, whatever. Everybody should be seeing all of these things and lifting up these voices. And I think that also, you know, my dad touched on something that I think is important, which is that whoever you are, you're not going to be able to speak to the experience of every writer, and that's certainly true of various ethnicities, various nationalities, various, you know, international writers, but also, like, whenever I see a show by, like, you know, rich New Yorkers who summer in the Hamptons, who use summer as a verb to begin with, this is incredibly foreign to me. And there are so many plays. I've seen them at Aurora, I've seen them, you know, all over the place. You know, that's a bewilderingly foreign perspective to mine. But also, you know, I mean, I see a Tennessee Williams play. I am not Southern, you know. There's a whole lot going on culturally there that I was not raised with. Plays where religion plays a large part. You know, I mean, it's something that I was a philosophy and religion major in college, so I mean, it's something that is of interest to me, but it's not, you know, it's not part of my culture. So I don't know. I feel like experiencing and relating and lifting up as many voices as possible is essential, and particularly when those voices are underrepresented, needs to be a priority, no matter who's writing it. And being aware of your own cultural baggage when going into it, I think, is important. I look back on some reviews that I wrote, say, 15 years ago, and am somewhat embarrassed by them. You know, I think I would not write that review in the same way now, you know, particularly of something like the Mikado. You know, I feel like writing about the Mikado now is a very different experience for me than writing about it, you know, in the early 2000s or something. And thank goodness, you know, thank goodness that we evolve as writers and as people and as a society, because my God, if we didn't, you know, where would we be? And I say this at a time when society doesn't seem to be progressing in a very useful direction, but hopefully, you know, that will change and ebb and flow.
One thing I would disagree with, Sam, and that is, in my experience in the Bay Area, the majority of theater critics have not been white men.
There have been a lot of women.
There have been a lot of women.
That's true.
And actually, when I left the Chronicle, there were basically 2 daily theater critics left standing, both women, Lily and Karen D'Souza, who is also a person of color. So half. You know, it's kind of like, now how we got there is because we have so few theater critics left. But when I started writing theater criticism, there were a lot of theater critics in the Bay Area, and there were a lot of daily newspapers. And the Berkeley Gazette, which was a daily, their critic was a woman. And the San Mateo Times, which was a daily, critic was a woman. And the San Francisco Examiner, Nancy Scott, was a woman, you know. So there were, it wasn't, you know, then at the San Jose Mercury, the guy retired and Judith Green became the main critic. So there was a period there when there were, you know, on the main weekly critics were myself and Misha Burson.
You know, we are running out of time. I could talk to you guys all day, and it's great, but I want to hear really quick, you know, just real quick, favorite shows that you've ever reviewed in the Bay Area. Any, just off the top of your head, any shows that stand out? We'd love to hear about Aurora shows that stand out, but any shows at all to hear, like what sticks in your mind? Favorite review that you wrote, even if it wasn't your favorite show.
Wow, that's huge. I did just want to say one last thing on the, and that is to get that. I do think we need that diversity of voices. How we get to it, I think, is a huge problem for all of us, because what you need is to reconfigure the world of theater criticism. Maybe you do it through a nonprofit association that sponsors a bunch of different, voices of different ethnicities, different backgrounds, but I don't know. So
I can imagine
shows.
getting a grant to do something like that. That'd be great.
I'm sorry.
I could imagine Theater Bay Area getting a grant to, support people's development as writers, as critics. That'd be interesting.
Yes, if Theater Bay Area could do it, or if UC Berkeley could do it, through the School of Journalism, or if there were some way, and I don't know how it could be done, but it would be such a wonderful thing to have.
There's so many favorite shows. I mean, it's one of the great blessings, right, of living in the Bay Area, that it's just constant dazzling shows. I mean, Black Odyssey at Cal Shakes, King of the Yees at SF Playhouse. This was some years ago, but 100 Flowers Project that Crowded Fire did, or 100 Days that Z Space did. I mean, just so many. I mean, you asked about some favorite Aurora shows, and I know that Eureka Day was a big favorite. I'm sorry.
I was basically fishing for that. Thank you. No.
Trouble in Mind was great. I remember,
and an important show to do.
But there's just been a ton at Aurora that I've enjoyed so much, and those are a few that come to mind immediately.
There were two. I was looking at it, back in over my list of shows at the Aurora, and Detroit was one of the ones that jumped out at me.
Oh, thank you.
And then I realized it jumped out at me twice, because there was
just Detroit, and there was Detroit.
Detroit 67. Yes,
right,
yes.
Detroit 67, the Dominique de Morceau show, which was one of the first of her shows that I saw, and wow, oh my God, the total immersion in that period. I lived through that period. I was involved in the civil rights movement in that period. But I had no idea what the actual experience of living in Detroit through that period was. It was just an amazing. And then the other Detroit that you directed by Lisa D'Amour.
That's right.
Was just a glorious piece. But I think you outdid yourself with Ideation.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's very nice.
One of my favorite shows of all time. And the feeling of paranoia that I walked out of that theater with has never left me, and it's a good thing too, considering the last 4 years. Sharon Ott's production of Heartbreak House was, to me, one of the all-time great productions in the Bay Area, and that's partly personal, because Heartbreak House and King Lear, for me, have always been those two shows that you always knew were among the greatest plays ever written. And you never saw them done as well as you knew it could be done. And she did it with Heartbreak House. She broke my heart. And she showed me how World War I had broken the heart of a whole, all of European culture, all the people who thought, well, anyway. And
one of the memorable shows I'd ever seen was actually, long before I was reviewing, but also at Berkeley Rep, like that Heartbreak House, was Tooth of Crime. With Howard Swain and Charles Dean, which just absolutely blew me away as a teenager. And every time I talk about talk about it with anybody who was involved in it or, saw it at the time. It remains like one of those top experiences.
Thank you both so much. This was such a great conversation. It's lovely to see you both. Rob, just one real quick little anecdote. I remember, I think it was the first Aurora show that you saw after you had retired. I believe it was the Heir Apparent. And I was watching you on opening night because you still come. I mean, this is the thing about Rob is he retires from theater after writing reviews every week for, so many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of reviews. And then what does he do? He keeps going to the theater, even though he's not writing reviews. And I saw you, Patrick Jones did something very funny on stage and you did this. You went, ah, and you like reached like you were going to write a note and then like realized you weren't holding any paper or pencil. and it was the sweetest thing. So I really just appreciate how much you both love this art form and everything that you've done over so many years. Thank you both, and thanks for joining us today.
Well,
thank you. Thank you both for all that you do, really. And I can't wait to see you back doing it again.
We're going to get there.
Thank you. Well, Josh, this week in lieu of a advocacy spotlight, we want to talk to the people about their civic duty. Do you want to share some info?
Yeah, so instead of shouting out a specific local organization this week, we are calling on everyone watching to make a plan to vote. Now, I suspect that most of you have already done this, but I want to make sure Election Day is November 3rd. If you need information about your voter registration and your options for voting, please visit iwillvote.com. And we will give you bonus points if you get a friend to make a plan to vote as well, and double bonus points. I don't know what that means, but you're going to get double bonus points if you get a friend who lives in a swing state to make a plan to vote. So that is iwillvote.com.
In the interim, we want to just thank friends that were watching live with us and chatting with us today. And if you have a thought or an idea that you'd like to share, remember you can email us at connects@auroratheater.org, connects@auroratheater.org. And of course, we are also available in an audio podcast format wherever you get your podcasts. Now, Josh, tell them one more time how they can check out the flyer.
So auroratheater.org for information and single tickets for the flats. Next week's episode is going to be our opening night celebration of the flats. We're going to welcome you all to that. And right now, we're going to give you a little teaser, a little taste of what you're going to get when you listen to the flats. Here it comes.
Jesus, what a week. I mean, what an actual era-defining week. The end of the world.
It was madness. And I just sat on the floor with my back against the bed. The world was about to end, and I was alone. And you were with him.
Is that just us?
No, look out there. The whole grid is down.
They gotta keep the lights on, send the helos out, patrol the streets, keep folks in view.
I think the odds that this leads to the end of the world, or even to the end of human civilization, are reasonably low.
Well, that's something, I guess.
I know when I'm with you, it feels right.
Do you think we're safe?
It is possible that the current situation is causing me some mental strain, and I've lost track of the days. In which case, I apologize.
That's cool, man. We're all just one step from losing it with those things.
You've gone shopping. Does that mean have you moved in here?
Oh, no. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It was Mark's weekend with the kids. We are getting separated. He's a cheating bastard, FYI.
You were only halfway between here and Kensington when it happened. You could have easily turned around to safety. To me.
I didn't mean that, okay?
Power's out, like you said.
Yes, we're going down. Come with us.
Okay, well, I should put these groceries away. Though, honestly, it's mostly Chardonnay.
Makes sense. Let me know if you need me.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
So a little taste there of what's to come.
So thrilling. So we hope you join us next week for our opening night episode. And I want to thank again our guests, Rob and Sam Hurwitts. And I want to thank you all for watching. and staying connected. Until next week. Bye.